Chapter 7. For 3 years, Ikemefuna lived in Okonkwo's household, and the elders of Umuofia seemed to have forgotten about him. He grew rapidly like a yam tendril in the rainy season, and was full of the sap of life. He had become wholly absorbed into his new family. He was like an elder brother to Nwoye, and from the very first seemed to have kindled a new fire in the younger boy. He made him feel grown up, and they no longer spent the evenings in Mother's hut while she cooked, but now sat with Okonkwo in his obi, or watched him as he tapped his palm tree for the evening wine. Nothing pleased Nwoye now more than to be sent for by his mother or another of his father's wives to do one of those difficult and masculine tasks in the home, like splitting wood or pounding food. On receiving such a message through a younger brother or sister, Nwoye would feign annoyance and grumble aloud about women and their troubles. Okonkwo was inwardly pleased at his son's development, and he knew it was due to Ikemefuna. He wanted Nwoye to grow into a tough young man capable of ruling his father's household when he was dead and gone to join the ancestors. He wanted him to be a prosperous man, having enough in his barn to feed the ancestors with regular sacrifices. And so he was always happy when he heard him grumbling about women. That showed that in time he would be able to control his womenfolk. No matter how prosperous a man was, if he was unable to rule his women and his children, and especially his women, he was not really a man. He was like the man in the song who had 10 and 1 wives and not enough soup for his fufu. So Okonkwo encouraged the boys to sit with him in his obi, and he told them stories of the land, masculine stories of violence and bloodshed. Nwoye knew that it was right to be masculine and to be violent, but somehow he still preferred the stories that his mother used to tell, in which she no doubt still told her to her younger children stories of the tortoise and his wily ways, and of the bird Eneke Ntioba, who challenged the whole world to a wrestling contest and was finally thrown by the cat. He remembered the story she often told of the quarrel between the earth and sky long ago, and how the sky withheld rain for 7 years until crops withered and the dead could not be buried because hose broke on the stony earth. At last Vulture was sent to plead with Sky and to soften his heart with a song of the suffering of the sons of men. Whenever Nwoye's mother sang this song, he felt carried away to the distant scene in the sky where Vulture, Earth's emissary, sang for mercy. At last Sky was moved to pity, and he gave to Vulture rain wrapped in leaves of cocoyam. But as he flew home, his long talon pierced the leaves, and the rain fell as it had never fallen before. And so heavily did it rain on Vulture that he did not return to deliver his message, but flew to a distant land, from where he had espied a fire. And when he got there, he found it was a man making a sacrifice. He warmed himself in the fire and ate the entrails. That was the kind of story that Nwoye loved. But he now knew that they were foolish. They were for foolish women and children, and he knew that his father wanted him to be a man. And so he feigned that he no longer cared for women's stories. And when he did this, he saw that his father was pleased and no longer rebuked him or beat him. So Nwoye and Ikemefuna would listen to Okonkwo's stories about tribal wars, or how, years ago, he had stalked his victim, overpowered him, and obtained his first human head. And as he told them of the past, they sat in darkness or in the dim glow of logs, waiting for the women to finish their cooking. When they finished, each brought her bowl of fufu and bowl of soup to her husband. An oil lamp was lit, and Okonkwo tasted from each bowl, then passed 2 shares to Nwoye and Ikemefuna. In this way, the moons and seasons passed, and then the locusts came. It had not happened for many a long year. The elders said locusts came once in a generation, reappeared every year for 7 years, and then disappeared for another lifetime. They went back to their caves in the distant land where they were guarded by a race of stunted men. And then after another lifetime, these men opened the caves again, and the locusts came to Umuofia. They came in the cold Harmattan season after the harvest had been gathered and ate up all the wild grass in the fields. Okonkwo and the 2 boys were working on the red outer walls of the compound. This was one of the lighter tasks after harvest season. A new cover of thick palm branches and palm leaves was set on the walls to protect them from the next rainy season. Okonkwo worked on the outside of the wall, and the boys worked from within. There were little holes from one side to the other on the upper levels of the wall, and through these Okonkwo passed the rope, or tietie, to the boys, and they passed it round the wooden stays and then back to him, and in this way the cover was strengthened on the wall. The woman had gone to the bush to collect firewood, and the little children to visit their playmates in the neighboring compounds. The harmattan was in the air and seemed to distill a hazy feeling of sleep on the world. Okonkwo and the boys worked in complete silence, which was only broken when a new palm frond was lifted on the wall or when a busy hen moved dry leaves about in her ceaseless search for food. Then quite suddenly a shadow fell on the world, and the sun seemed hidden behind a thick cloud. Okonkwo looked up from his work and wondered if it was going to rain at such an unlikely time of the year. But almost immediately a shout of joy broke out in all directions, and Umuofia, which had dozed in the noonday haze, broke into life and activity. Locusts are descending was joyfully chanted everywhere, and men, women, and children left their work or their play and ran into the open to see the unfamiliar sight. The locusts had not come for many, many years, and only the old people had seen them before. At first, a fairly small swarm came. They were the harbingers sent to survey the land. And then appeared on the horizon a slowly moving mass like a boundless sheet of black cloud drifting towards Umuofia. Soon it covered half the sky, and the solid mass was now broken by tiny eyes of light like shining stardust. It was a tremendous sight, full of power and beauty. Everyone was now about, talking excitedly and praying that the locusts should camp in Umuofia for the night. For although locusts had not visited Umuofia for many years, everybody knew by instinct that they were very good to eat. And at last the locusts did descend. They settled on every tree and on every blade of grass. They settled on the roofs and covered the bare ground. Mighty tree branches broke away under them, and the whole country became the brown earth color of the vast hungry swarm. Many people went out with baskets trying to catch them, but the elders counseled patience till nightfall, and they were right. The locusts settled in the bushes for the night, and their wings became wet with dew. Then all Umuofia turned out in spite of the cold harmattan, and everyone filled his bags and pots with locusts. The next morning they were roasted in clay pots, then spread in the sun until they became dry and brittle. And for many days this rare food was eaten with solid palm oil. Okonkwo sat in his obi, crunching happily with Ikemefuna and Nwoye, and drinking palm wine copiously, when Ogbuefi Ezeudu came in. Ezeudu was the oldest man in this quarter of Umuofia.